Hi, this is Trevor Conquergood. Welcome to this week's R&K Software Club's video for the week. And the topic for this week is about how to connect your stitching to avoid jumps and the tie-in stitches and the tie-off stitches. And so there's kind of two different ways that we can learn to do that. And if you're ready to get started, let's go ahead and bring up my workspace. And so when I go on the workspace, basically I need to create some embroidery first. And so I'm just going to use like our pencil tool, and I have it kind of like on the freehand mode so that I can try to draw, kind of like imagine that I'm drawing some quilting stitches right now. And so I'm like left click and drag and then right click to stop drawing. And, so basically I've drawn like 4 lines. And if you look in the sequence view, you can see that there are 4 individual pieces of artwork. And if we were to select them all and then click on the button for, convert to run stitch, and if you turned on 3D, you might think that you created a really awesome quilting design. Only if you turn off 3D or if you stitch it out, you'll notice that it's going to do like your first line, and then it's going to basically tie off and then trim and then jump to the beginning of the next line and repeat. And so, that is what we want to learn to avoid, right? Is how can we connect all this? And normally when quilters quilt, they would start here, would sew to the bottom of the line, but then they would sew back up the line to the beginning of the next line, and then repeat that kind of process. Well, we can easily accomplish that, and there are really kind of 2 different ways that I would suggest. The first one would be, if you select everything, sure, you can use the optimize entry and exit, and that's basically going to get the software to learn the best place to start and end each line so that they connect. And now if you watch it stitch out, it does exactly what I said. It walks to the bottom of the first line and then back to the beginning, and before doing the next line and the next line and the next line. And only it's not quite perfect yet because of the tie-in and the tie-off stitches that are automatically created on every segment. And I don't know if you noticed it as it stitched out, but like right here where those 2 lines connect, as the stitch got to the end of the line, it did 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches before moving on to the next shape, and then doing 1, 2, 3, 4 more stitches over there before actually then sort of moving along. And so the tie off and the tie in are something that, if you're going to use this method, then you also need to select all of these shapes and look in the properties area for the tab that kind of has the little red X and little red circle. It's called the commands. And when I click on commands, you can take control of the tie-in and the tie-off. So the tie-in and the tie-off are set to basic, which means, yes, put one in. There's the option of basic or triangle. On a run stitch, you definitely want to use basic. I use basic pretty much for everything, but the triangle, basic will take 2 steps backwards and 2 steps forwards to do a little kind of dash, whereas a triangle will take a step to the left, step to the right, and step back to the top, kind of to make a little triangle. Either way, you can turn them off by clicking on none, right? So if I turn both the tie in and the tie off, then now our design will simply start sewing at the beginning and connect each of these lines with no extra sort of stitching right here where they connect. Okay, now you will notice that there's a jump there, and that is because when you look at it, 2,500% or 5,000%, the software shows you that the lines aren't exactly connected. But that said, there's no tie off and there's no tie in, and there's no way any person would ever try and trim that stitch out. It's probably shorter than your typical stitch length, so it's not a problem. However, sometimes it could be a problem, and it's with the second method. So this was the first method. It's basically use your optimize entry exit points to kind of learn the entry and exits, and then turn off the tie-ins and the tie-offs. And notice when I select these shapes, if I use the shape tool, you can see the green entry point where it starts and how the software's moved the red exit point to line up with the next line. And so that's what, the tool remove or optimize entry and exit did. And then we used the commands to turn off the settings. And so that works perfectly. However, another way of doing this would be to use the combine tool. And so why don't we just start over? And this time I will click and drag and then right click and do another one, click and drag and right click and click and drag and right click. And so, and notice that I'm drawing this at 39%. And basically the closer you get to things, the more accurate you can be. And, if I look, I'm like, those lines aren't necessarily, right next to each other. There is a bit of a space in between them. So it kind of matters when you do the branching, and it's not hard to fix. But the point is, if I select all of these, so click and drag to select those 3 artwork lines, let's make them a run stitch. So now you'll see the stitching, and you can sort of witness the jumping that's happening that we don't want to happen. And so this time, instead of using the, optimize entry and exit, we come over to the, on the right at the top where it says combine. And the combine tool tells the software that all of these lines are going to be one line. And notice in my sequence area, it just shows it like one thing instead of the 4 individual things. And only it's not quite perfect because you can still see the jumping, and that we were doing this to avoid the jumping. And the problem is when I drew them, they weren't close enough together for the software to understand that they could be combined. And so what that means is if I select my shape and I go to the shape tool and see how it's like jumping to this point, like let's unzoom out, see how that it's supposed to start here and finish there, but for some reason it jumps to this piece first before jumping over to that piece, and maybe even to this piece. And so the reason that's happening and what we want to do to fix it is to make sure that these are just a little bit closer. And watch when I move that one closer and then either right click or hit enter, and that jump went away. Because now it understands, and so I do need to do both, because it understands that these 2 lines can be stitched together. And so similarly, if I just move this point close enough and right click, no, still not close enough, get it close enough that they're almost touching there, boom. I mean, if you want to make them touching, go ahead, just bring it right on top of the other line. That's fine too. But the point is, now look, it starts right here and it finishes right there. If you were a quilter, you'd probably want to move the exit point to there so that when you watched it stitch out, it would start right where you told it to and walk down, no tie-in or tie-off stitches on the in-between, just at the end of the design like that. So that is pretty cool as well. And so combine works really well, but you do need to be a little more accurate when you're drawing it, because when you combine those designs, they want to find where they combine. It kind of reminded me, the very first weekly video that I ever recorded for R&K Distributing was back in 2015. I went and found it. Here I am. Let's just go back to the top of the page here. This is the R&K Software Club. And I clicked on the, the tab for the featured weekly videos, right? So basically, I'll go right back to the home page, and I clicked on FTCU, and then scroll down to where it says featured weekly videos. So this is where you can find all of the past ones. You will need to be signed in to be able to get, to the past ones. But notice when I go on this page, this would be the latest video here. It's at the top. And then these are ones from 2023. But if you keep scrolling down, those are ones from 2022, this 2021, and 2020, and 2019. Well, scroll all the way back. The very first weekly video I ever did for R&K Distributing was in 2015. And so it's in this group right here. If you scroll through, it has a redwork lady design, and I explain how I could digitize the entire redwork lady as individual lines and then use the combine tool to make it one perfect redwork embroidery design. And so coming back to the software, you see, I showed you for quilting, the ideal is to do it sort of a single ply, and then where necessary, a 2-ply. Mostly single, but if needed, a 2. But when you do the Redwork Lady design, what you really want is everything to be 2 plies and not some 2 and some 1. I think typically the reason for that is to make everything look balanced. All the lines are kind of weighted the same. And if you're doing single ply run stitch and you get a thread break and you have to fix it, it's a little bit more noticeable than if you're doing 2-ply run stitch and you get a thread break and you have to fix it. So that's another reason why typically we would do our Redwork designs in all in 2-ply. And to make this all in 2-ply, all I have to do is bring the red exit point back to the beginning. Now it will do the final pass where, once it kind of walked down to here, all it really needed to do was walk back to here, back to here, back to the beginning to connect everything as a perfect 2-ply. And so when you use the combine tool, you have the option. See, so it actually kind of walked to the end and then it walked to the beginning, but either way, it did all of that stitching together at one time. So yeah, one more thing that I'll include in this week's RNK Software Club's video of the week, and that's a little bit about the button right here for the auto lock stitches. So when I use auto lock stitches, because remember here I turned off those auto lock stitches. Well, here the software will not take them out, only add them in. So what if you take them out, like maybe, and just as an example of this, maybe I've made an embroidery design that's made up of satin stitching, and I have like multiple shapes that are in satin stitches like this. And so I'll do quickly an auto satin, and I'll teach them, optimize entry exit so that they are kind of closest point together, so they connect right there. And then if I just quickly go into the commands and tell it to have none and none, then when you stitch this out, the idea is you won't trim that thread. It's meant to stay there. But just know that if you turn them off, there is still the ability to turn on auto lock stitches, which is normally turned on. Auto lock stitches will add back in the tie off at the end of this, and the tie off at the end and tie in at the beginning when you save it to a stitch format like PES or JEF or whatever format you use. So they won't show on screen, but when you save the design to PES, they get added only if, and there's a rule, it's in your preferences, you go into the preferences window under the digitizing tab at the bottom. Auto lock stitches is set to 5 millimeters. So that says if this distance, and if you use a ruler and you measure from here to there, and it's in inches, so to figure it out in metric, I'll just switch to metric. It's 4 millimeters. So therefore, no tie-in and tie-off. But if you made that design larger and then saved it, and therefore that jump became, longer and more like 5 or greater, then the software would start to put those tie-in and tie-offs into the design as they're needed. So just know that the default setting for tie-ins and tie-offs is actually by default always turned on, and you can turn them off if you want to. And if you turn them off, you can still use the, auto lock tool to have the software add them back in when they're kind of needed. So yeah. Anyway, you guys, thank you so very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Until next week, have a great day and bye for now.